What's going on, everyone? Welcome to Movie Emporium's TV review of Severance Season 2, Episode 9, which is called The After Hours and is the penultimate episode of the series for Season 2 and is directed by Briesewitz. Okay, guys, I know a lot of people were not fans of Episode 8, and I understand it was very slow, but I think it had a lot of meaning behind, Cabell and what she had to go through. But some people don't agree. It is what it is. It is unfortunate, but the After Hours, I think, is an episode that is part one of the finale. So therefore, I think it struggles with completing an episode, to be fairly honest, because it leaves such a lot of threads open for what is possibly going to be the season finale of this series, or at least for this season of season 2. And the reason I say that is because I think what last week's episode did that was unfortunate is when it does a lot of the story arcs for this episode, a lot of it feels rushed. A lot of it feels like we're missing some stuff. And I think if you hadn't focused on last week's episode, which I thought was really good, but I think if you had more focused on like ramping up what this episode was doing with, of course, Irving and Burt, and of course, Dylan and his wife, and the whole Cabell and Mark stuff. We spent 2 weeks without seeing like half these characters, to be fairly honest. Most of them actually. So there is an unfortunate circumstance where this episode loses impact, to be fairly honest. It's still a really good episode. Like, I really like what they're doing, and I like the implications of like how Lumen seems to be falling apart, the implications of how these individual characters are affected by what Lumen has done to them. I guess I just wanted a little bit more and was expecting more, and I think once again, you had a really good episode with episode 7, and then you had episode 8, which is very divisive, considered like one of the worst episodes of the series. And I think if you had taken episode 8 out, now that I think about it, I think adding that stuff in, I think it would have worked a little bit better. But this episode, once again, it's setting up the season finale. I think unless there's some major implications of like a surprise twist, I think Cold Harbor is essentially at this point the boxing up of emotions, getting rid of it. I think it's really interesting to see that once Cold Harbor is done, we see, of course, Dr. Maurer, and he's talking to, of course, Drummond. I think we're seeing at a point now where what they're tending to do is create a society of yes people, create a society of people who don't think on their own. And that seems very familiar to stuff what Mike Judge talks about in Idiocracy. That seems very familiar with what we're going on today, which I'm not going to, go into politics, but there is very heavy-handed material that is specifying that particular kind of angle. And I think what Cold Harbor is I think it's a disconnect from reality, a disconnect from your emotions, to get rid of the personal ideas and personal ideologies and make everyone a singular whole, like a cult in a lot of respects, is which kind of what Lumen has seemed to be. And you see that with like how Burt, when he talks to Irving and talks about how he was kind of like a man who drove people around and people disappeared, how Irving was kind of onto that. I think, when you watch Dylan and his wife and how that plays out, how, Milchick is, talking to Miss Huang and about her kind of move up in the world of Lumen. There is a lot of cult-like mentality to it, and I think that was kind of, it's a fascinating thing if you think about it. There is a lot of like, here we're going to set up this, and here we're going to set up that, and here we're going to do this, and here we're going to do that. And then we're going to allow Cold Harbor to kind of pay off that whole thing that's been going off, not only for the season, but for this episode, because it's starting to introduce a lot of things that are going to be finality things for a season. And with that said, this episode basically is unfortunate with Dylan. Dylan has been a very tragic character, like Irving, where Dylan is an individual that was he was so for Lumen, and then he found out he had kids, and he found out a world that he's being lied to about, and now he has now he finds out his wife and him have had a relationship, and she finally tells the Audi version of Dylan that she kissed the indie version. And this is one of the problems where you left these characters off like the last couple weeks, so you have to kind of go into the implications. You kind of have to make up your own ideologies and ideas about how long this has been going on. But the point of the matter is, Audi Dylan is of course going to be very upset because he's like, you're basically using my any version to have a relationship. And she's like, you seem so lost. And like, it's not an excuse for what she's doing. She's not doing the right thing. She's supposed to be very there for her husband that she cares very, very much about. But the sad nature of the whole thing is that she feels that the any version of Dylan is such a fresh take on their marriage and relationship that when she approaches the any Dylan and she tells him that she has to stop it, of course Dylan any version is going to be upset. He feels betrayed. He feels like he's being used. It's the way he feels with when he talks about all he has is like finger traps. It's like the poor guy just doesn't have any luck or anything going for him. His any version is as despondent as his Audi version. That's really sad and really just, it's imposing when you think about it, because it really implicates the nature of like how somebody in Lumen is somebody on the Severance floor is being used. So therefore, watching Dylan be so despondent, watching how he attacks Helly when she asks about Irving and the paper that he has hidden behind the wall, when he basically treats her like he basically calls himself an a-hole, an asshole, and he basically uses that to eventually go to Milchick and quit. It's like he's given up. It's like any relationship that's ended. He tries to propose to her, like, I'll treat you better than my Audi version will, and she doesn't accept it, which is understandable. But she basically uses him how Lumen has used him, their own gain. That's basically what's happening here. He's being used for his own gain, so of course he's going to quit. And of course Milchick is very upset by this, uses big words, which is what's always been great about Tramell's character in this episode or in this series. But his character is kind of left off going to the elevator to wait to see how his Audi version responds, because even his Audi's version is like, I guess I'll just go and quit. I'll kill off the any mark just to not have to worry about this, and you betrayed me. And he throws away the smoothie he's drinking. It's just, there is a tragic element to Dylan, because he's a guy who is once again been mistreated and mishandled. And when he loses his job by Lumen and he goes to the door factory and he's like treated like horribly by that guy, the manager, because he was a severed employee. He's trying to do right by his family. But once again, you get to a point in your life and the nature of the creativity of who you are, that when everything compounds against you, everything goes against you, and then you finally have something and you find out that there is a level of like betrayal when it comes to your wife, that is a very disheartening thing. And I think Dylan and Zach Cherry really do a nice job. Like Zach Cherry doing a really nice job. And I think it's Emmy level material that Zach Cherry has not gotten when it comes to his character. I mean, it's only 2 seasons, but I think he definitely deserves it, like Tramell does. I'm sorry, yeah, like Tramell Tillman does. But it's gonna be really interesting thing to see whether his Audi version accepts the resignation or not. So we'll find out, I'm sure, in the Cold Harbor episode, which is next episode. But then you have like the stuff with Tramell, the Milchick stuff, where he basically is allowing Miss Huang, Eustace Huang, which is what we find out her name is, next step forward. She is now past the Wintertide thing, which of course we learned what Cabell does. It is a very tragic storytelling aspect, because we clearly know now that Lumen is breaking laws and doing their own thing by allowing child forced labor. It's starting to feel like Lumen has basically abused her in a lot of respects and has used her, which is kind of how it feels. We see Milchick make her destroy the one toy that made her feel like a kid. You could tell that Miss Huang is just very upset. She even apologizes to Dylan, which Dylan says is not your fault. It's very sad. But she's going to the Gunnell Egan Empathy Center to work on global reforms, whatever that means. Who knows what that means? But she's basically being pulled away. She's being Jedi'd from her family. Her bed's being transferred to the Egan Empathy Center. And you watch how tragic this is all about tragedy of these characters. You see it with Mark. You see it with Devon. You see it with Cabell. You see it with Milchick. You see it with Huang, we see it with Dylan, we see it with Irving. The tragedy that Lumen has portrayed on these people, has put on these people, is very evident in this episode. Even Helly R, who is the daughter of Egan, and we see her at the beginning when she eats the egg, and when Egan, the father watches her, is like, why did you eat the raw version of this egg? The level of just like crassness, you could tell probably when she was a kid, she was basically used as a kid for work labor, and because she's an Egan, she has to go with it. The nature of like abuse is really prevalent in this series and really prevalent in this episode. And these are characters that are coming to their wits' end, and it's going to be really interesting to see how this episode ends, because then you have to deal with the fact of like, what do you do for season 3? Now we'll talk about this when Cold Harbor, the episode releases, but if it goes the way it's going and we find out, as Dr. Maurer has talked about, how in Drummond and all that, and what Cabell says that she'll be dead, it's going to lead into a collapse of some sort, whether, you know, it stops, it just ends, kind of like similar to what the last season did, where it's going to leave some really open threads about how they retrieve Gemma, because, you know, as Mark says, he's going to come back in the next day, but they're 96% away, or they're 4% away from completing Cold Harbor, which is a storytelling element. It's a way for the series to have their kind of like twisty type of thing, I guess you could say. But yeah, the Miss Wong stuff, and watching her get on the bus and how sad that is, and just the nature of she's being pulled away from her family, and just kind of the what does that mean for her? What's that going to happen to her? Clearly she's not severed, so she knows exactly what's going on. But it is a sad thing to see, because then you have Milchick being confronted by Drummond about why hasn't he been back. And Milchick probably has one of the best scenes in the episode, where he basically tells, and excuse my language, he tells Drummond to eat shit, and, you know, because basically he says some words that put off Drummond, and Drummond's like, you need to say a shorter version of this, you need to get rid of, you know, the wordy words and stuff like that. And Milchick basically, he shortens it, but then he just basically, unlike what Helly did in the second or third episode of the series, he tells Drummond to go F himself. He basically says, you need to respect me. I'm in charge of the Severance floor. There has to be a level of respect between the two. I think it really made him upset when they gave him the paintings that were of African-American individuals of Egan, which is a misunderstanding or a racist type of thing against, of course, Milchick. The look on Drummond's face either shows that he is taken aback, he doesn't know how to respond. He clearly feels that the severed floor is falling apart, and it's going to take a lot to bring him back into focus, which is whether they can do that or not is a different story. But I really love Tramell in that scene, because it really shows that he's very capable of doing some really good work. And of course you have the nature of like how he answers Mark's call, and Mark and him have a conversation about, you know, I'm out here doing my thing, and, you know, is that wrong? Is like having your own life wrong? And Milchick looks at the painting, which has the substance of, you know, the depth of who we are and how much deeper it is underneath. And you see like the look on Milchick's face and how sad he is, and how just heartbroken he really is as a manager who really feels betrayed. He says, will you show up tomorrow? And of course Mark says, yes, I'll show up tomorrow. He's like, okay, we'll see you tomorrow. And Milchick he's really a character that has been put through the ringer through this entire season. And I love Tramell as a character actor in this episode, or this season, as well as this episode, because he's gone through so many emotions. I do have to say, though, the thing that most disappointing is the Irving and Burt stuff. Not in the simple fact that it's very tragic and very sad. It's the simple fact that, like, at the end of the episode with Burt, Attila episode with Burt and of course Irving, there was a candid feel of a relationship that was going to form because of how they were in Lumen and Severed Floor. And what you're seeing is the nature of how sad Burt's life has been, that he wanted to go to the Severed Floor because he wanted to have a new life and have a different viewpoint on things. He looked like he was a strong man, to be fairly honest, for Lumen, and it has eaten away from him. And he, in so many terms, finds himself inside Irving's house, which surprises Irving. We see the dog and stuff like that staring at him. But, you know, it's one of those, like, you know, surprise twist things where basically Burt is sending Irving to go off and not be seen again. Which, once again, when you have that scene or you have that episode and then you don't see Irving and Burt for a while because you have 2 episodes that you need to get through, and you come to this storyline, it's very sudden, it's very abrupt, and as heartbreaking and sad and melancholy as it is, where Irving's like, I'm ready for this, but Burt is like, we can't do this, and so on and so forth. it really is a testament to the storytelling just isn't there for that segment. It feels that it abruptly ended, and whether that means John Turturro is done for the series is a question that's going to be left up in the air, whether he even comes back for the next episode or he just they leave him for the next season. But what Burt tells him and how effed up and once again tragic Burt really is as a character really shows that there is some level of sadness to Burt as an individual. His, husband, who is very despondent and has known his wares for the last 20 years or whatever. We find out once again that he's been working for Lumen in different forms and factors. It really is a sad state of affairs. And then on top of everything, you watch the dog and you watch Irving get on the train and go off into the wild blue yonder or wherever they're heading. Who knows at this point where they're going to head, but I guarantee you this is the last time we're going to see John Turturro in this season. I'm thinking because Cold Harbor has to do a lot to wrap up this season. Whether that's successful or not is going to be a different story, so we'll see. But that leads basically into the last big segment that is going to be the big player for the last episode, which is Mark and Devon and, of course, Cabell. Once again, I think people were really upset with last episode, so this makes this even worse for people because though Mark is very despondent to what Cabell has done, very angry with what Cabell has done, he seems to fall in line, to be fairly honest. He calls Milchick, like I talked about earlier. Devon, who I do agree she is kind of out of place with her character and stuff like that when it comes to how she's being represented. She was used by Cabell for lactation fraud and stuff like that. So there is that. But basically, she mentions Cold Harbor to Mark. She mentions that he clearly hasn't finished it, and that if he finishes it, Gemma is dead, which really makes him upset, which of course it would. But they need to go to the birthing cabin to basically, in essence, talk to any Mark. The easiest way to get any Mark to comply with what they need to do inside the lumen, the severed floor. And basically they go to the birthing cabinet, and then Cabell and the guard have a talk, something about Gold Star or whatever. I don't remember. It doesn't really make any sense to me. But it leads to a really cool kind of transition where Mark goes into his innie self. He's confused, but Devon's like, we're here, and you remember what the last thing you said to me was? And he's like, yeah, it was, she's alive. And that's when Cabell is standing in front of a fire. It's a really cool shot, but it basically is going to be the revelation to any Mark about Gemma, about what Cold Harbor is, about everything that has been going on in this season. It is the wrap up of what's going on. That's why this penultimate episode, why it feels like a part one, because you have to finish out. It's like what Breaking Bad did in its season or series finale, where you had that really good setup and then had the kind of conclusion. I don't think the setup's that strong in this, but I think it has moments of tragedy and tragic characters in their arcs. Mark has gone through all this stuff, and it's really going to be interesting to see how the story ends up playing out. But once again, in the beginning of the episode, you see Helena swimming. You see her with the eggs, and I love the plate with the little kid and the eggs kind of spread around it, it's kind of mapping the closeness of the kid, which is the child labor thing, which is what the series is kind of hinting at. And the last thing I'll truly bring up for this episode is when Helly is trying to memorize the paper that Irving had put there, and of course we see the bell ding on the elevator, and Egan, the father, comes up and says basically, you betrayed me. And she goes, what the F? It's that's gonna be horrifying to watch the guy who basically runs Lumen come up, and you're an any version and you've seen him before, and the implications of that, I'm curious of what you guys think, because yeah, it's Kier and all these people, and just, oh my god, it's insanity. It's the tragic nature of Helly and what she has to deal with, and you saw at the very beginning of the episode too. So we'll see what happens, but it's gonna be interesting to see how that plays out and what the implications of that are. So, but it's an episode that I think is very strong. I honestly think it's strong. I think it works. I think it has some great moments. I just think it's weak in the simple fact of there's a lot of stuff missing. There's a lot of arcs that are just kind of rushed. I think you could have gone a little long in the tooth with the Dylan and his wife thing, but the Irving and Burt stuff could have been a little bit longer. I think it could have been a little more fleshed out, and it wasn't. And everything else is fine. Like the Miss Huang stuff, the Milchick stuff, the Mark and Devon and Cobell stuff. I think it all works. I think it gives a little bit of structure and a little bit of motive to what the next episode in the season finale is going to be. So I hope it works. I hope the season finale goes out with a bang, and we'll see what happens. So there you go. But to conclude the review, with that said, I'm going to give this episode like an 8.5 out of 10. And once again, it's not the strongest episode of the series, but I think it's a really good episode. So 8.5 out of 10 with the stuff that kind of is weak points in the series. And yeah, there you go. Anyways, with that said, that is going to be my take on season 2, episode 8 of Severance, which is called The After Hours. In the comments below, as I always say, let me know what you think of the episode. What is your overall take on what's going to happen? Do you hate that last episode? Tell me why. Do you think it works better with this episode? I'm just kind of curious what people think. So as always, let me know in the comments below. But otherwise, if you like what you see on this channel, hit the subscribe button to join Movie Emporium. Hit that notification bell at top to find what's coming next. If you like this video, awesome. Hit that like button. And as always, we'll see you guys on the next video. Peace out, guys.